The War Council chamber aboard the Xa'thari flagship Eternal Dominion hummed with the low frequency reserved for matters of cosmic importance. Fleet Commander Zha'thik's sensory appendages rippled with what his species considered amusement as he examined the holographic display before him. These humans, he clicked, the translation matrix struggling with his contempt. They still use chemical propellants, kinetic projectiles, explosives that require combustion. His thorax vibrated with laughter, a sound like grinding metal that his officers eagerly mimicked. Sub-Commander Velcor approached, his carapace still bearing the dust of the reconnaissance mission. "Commander, I witnessed their weapons testing on their fourth planet, the one they call Mars. They were celebrating the successful deployment of what they termed a railgun. The projectile traveled at merely 30% of light speed." The chamber erupted in clicking laughter. 30%, the Xa'thari had abandoned such primitive technology 12,000 cycles ago. "And their warships?" Zha'thik inquired, already knowing the answer would entertain. "Armor plating, Commander, physical metal alloys. They haven't even achieved gravitic shielding. Their largest vessels still require chemical fuel for maneuvering." Velcor paused, his mandibles twitching. "They call them carriers because they transport smaller attack craft that cannot travel between stars independently." Zha'thik's primary eyes narrowed with calculation beneath the mockery. The humans had rejected the galactic Concordat's offer of protectorate status 3 cycles ago. They had been given a choice: submit to Xa'thari guidance or face incorporation by force. Their response had been colorful. The human ambassador had used a phrase the translation matrix had struggled with: "Come and take it." How delightfully naive. "They evolved on a death world, Commander," another officer interjected, using the term with ironic emphasis. "Apparently they consider their planet's gravity, atmospheric pressure, and temperature extremes to be significant advantages. As if physical durability matters in modern warfare." Zha'thik rose from his command throne, his 3-meter frame casting shadows across the tactical display. Earth hung there, a blue jewel in the darkness, orbited by dozens of primitive defense stations and hundreds of those quaint armored warships. "The Concordat grows impatient," he announced. "We've given the humans sufficient time to reconsider. Now we demonstrate why 700 species bow to Xa'thari supremacy. We will disable their defenses, occupy their command centers, and integrate their genetic catalog into our database. 3 solar days. That's all we'll need." "And if they resist, Commander?" Zha'thik's mandibles spread in what his species considered a smile. "Then we'll learn exactly how effective their precious kinetic weapons are against gravitic displacement fields." The fleet emerged from jump space at the edge of humanity's home system. 72 hours later, 3 Xa'thari warships, each one a masterwork of technology that would have seemed like magic to civilization still crawling through their own solar systems. The flagship alone massed more than humanity's entire orbital infrastructure. Aboard the defense station Guardian 3, Rear Admiral Sarah Chen watched the contacts multiply across her tactical display with the calm that came from 30 years of military service. Beside her, her tactical officer swore softly. "Ma'am, LIDAR confirms 300 capital-class vessels, energy signatures consistent with gravitic drives and plasma-based weapons. They're holding position at the heliopause." Chen nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the red combat lighting that now bathed the command center. "Any communication?" "Yes, ma'am. Standard Concordat ultimatum. Surrender within 1 solar hour or they commence pacification operations." "Pacification," Chen's voice was dry. "Is that what we're calling invasion these days?" She activated her command channel, her voice carrying to every human military installation from the Kuiper Belt to Mercury. "All stations, all ships. Battle Condition 1. Execute Plan Thermopylae." Thermopylae. The name echoed through human history, a narrow pass where 300 Spartans had held an army of thousands. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone who'd studied Earth's bloody past. "Ma'am," her communications officer looked up, young face pale but determined. The Chinese, Russian, and European stations are acknowledging. The civilian transports are beginning evacuation to the inner system. ETA on the fleet? The fleet, Chen said softly, is already here. Across human-controlled space, ships that had been tagged as commercial freighters, mining vessels, and transport craft began to shed their disguises. Armor plating rotated to reveal weapons batteries. Cargo containers split open to expose missile pods. Seemingly unarmed shuttles activated military-grade sensors and targeting systems. Humanity had learned much from its own history. Deception was as much a weapon as any gun. On the Eternal Dominion, Zha'thik observed the human response with growing irritation. They weren't running. They weren't even attempting to negotiate further. Instead, those primitive metal boxes they called warships were maneuvering into defensive formations around their planet and major stations. Analysis, he demanded. Commander, they're deploying in what appears to be a pre-gravitic warfare formation. Overlapping fields of fire. Mutual support positions. They seem to be prioritizing coverage of their inhabited areas and infrastructure. The tactical officer paused. It's actually quite elegant for kinetic age warfare. How touching. They're going to die defending their dirt. Signal the fleet, advance in delta formation. Target their defense stations first. Disable but do not destroy. We'll want to study their primitive systems once they surrender. The 10 Xa'thari fleet moved forward, a wall of technological superiority that had crushed resistance across 100 systems. Their gravitic shields could disperse energy weapons and deflect physical projectiles. Their plasma cannons could slag a city from orbit. Their sensors could track a single ship across light years. They were unstoppable. Admiral Chen watched them come, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that had been passed down through military tradition since humans first fought in organized groups. Around her, the command center hummed with controlled urgency. Voices called out ranges, vectors, approach angles, 8 million kilometers, and closing, ma'am. All stations report weapons hot and tracking, missile batteries armed and awaiting your command. Chen waited. Patience was as much a weapon as surprise. Let them come closer. Let them think they knew what they were facing. 6 million kilometers, ma'am. They're accelerating, formation holding steady. On the Eternal Dominion, Zha'thik felt the pleasant anticipation of an easy victory. The humans weren't even powering up energy weapons. Of course they didn't have energy weapons. How delightfully backward. Commander, sensors detect massive power surges across the human defensive grid. Unknown purpose. Probably their primitive communications systems panicking, Zha'thik dismissed. Continue advance. Prepare to... The universe turned into fire. From every human installation, from every warship, from converted civilian vessels and hidden weapons platforms scattered across the orbital planes, humanity's response erupted. Not the elegant particle beams or plasma bolts of civilized warfare, not the sophisticated gravitic warheads that most species employed. Thousands upon thousands of missiles, chemical rockets accelerating payloads to relativistic speeds through sheer, brutal thrust, each one targeted, each one guided by systems that the Xa'thari's sophisticated sensors had dismissed as irrelevant. Incoming! The tactical officer shrieked. 40,000 projectiles, estimated impact in. The gravitic shields on the lead 10 Xa'thari vessels activated automatically, powerful fields designed to deflect or disperse incoming fire. They worked perfectly. Against 10 projectiles, even 100, the shields would have been impenetrable. Against 40,000 missiles arriving in waves, each one detonating exactly where human war computers had calculated for maximum disruptive effect, the shields did what any system does when overwhelmed. They failed, not all at once, not dramatically, but in cascading pockets across the 10 Xa'thari fleet. Shields flickered and collapsed under sustained bombardment, and in those brief windows human weapons found their marks. Zha'thik watched in disbelief as 3 destroyers in the outer formation simply vanished. One moment they were there, the next they were expanding clouds of superheated debris. What was that? Nuclear fission devices, Commander. Multiple warheads in excess of 50 megatons. They're using nuclear weapons in the opening salvo. Another species might have hesitated, might have been shocked by the casual use of weapons most civilized races reserved for planetary bombardment or star-killer last resorts. The Xa'thari were not easily intimidated. Return fire. All batteries. Show these primitives what real... The second wave hit before he finished speaking. Not missiles this time. Kinetic penetrators launched from railguns, accelerated to 30% of light speed. Simple metal rods, masses of tungsten and depleted uranium, carrying nothing but velocity and mass. When you accelerate a telephone pole to a third of light speed and drive it through a spaceship, sophistication becomes irrelevant. Kinetic energy doesn't care about your technological advancement. Physics is democracy's cruelest weapon. The Xa'thari plasma cannons spoke, beautiful and terrible, carving through the void toward human positions. And for the first time, Zha'thik felt something he hadn't experienced in 300 cycles of warfare. The humans had moved, not jumped, not teleported. Those metal boxes had used brute chemical thrust to simply accelerate out of his firing solutions, their course changes predicted and executed faster than his weapons could track. They scattered like a swarm, no longer in neat defensive formations but spreading across three-dimensional space in patterns that seemed random but clearly weren't. Where did they get me firing solutions? Unable to acquire, Commander. They're using chemical propellant for course corrections, no power signature before thrust. Our predictive algorithms can't compensate. A human carrier, obsolete Earth designation USS Gettysburg, rotated on its axis with jerking thruster burns that would have been nauseating to Xa'thari physiology. Its flight deck, opened to vacuum, began launching fighters. Not sleek gravitic craft, but blocky, armored things that flew on chemical rockets and mounted what looked like rotary cannons. Rotary cannons. In space combat. In this age. The fighters swarmed toward the Xa'thari cruiser, dominant fists like angry insects, and when they opened fire, the cruiser's shields did what they were designed to do. They dispersed the energy, spread it across the field surface, rendered it harmless. Except the rounds weren't energy. They were tungsten-cored, depleted uranium-jacketed slugs, fired at rates exceeding 100 per second. The shields didn't know what to do with them. Neither did the armor beneath when thousands of rounds found the same impact points, drilling through composite materials that had been designed to withstand plasma, not sustained kinetic assault. Dominant fist listed, atmosphere venting from 100 punctures, and the human fighters turned as one, moving to their next target with mechanical precision. Zha'thik's sensory appendages were rigid. With shock. This is impossible. They're winning with technology we abandoned before we achieved interstellar flight. Velcor, to his credit, had shifted from mockery to analysis. Commander, recommendation, withdraw to maximum engagement range and employ long-range bombardment. Their kinetic weapons lose effectiveness with distance. It was sound tactics. It was also exactly what Admiral Chen had expected. They're pulling back, her tactical officer reported. Looks like they're trying to establish distance. Then we don't let them. Chen's voice carried across the command channel. All ships close to knife fighting range. Missile boats continue saturation fire. Carriers launch all fighters, defense stations, railguns. To rapid fire, bracket their retreat vectors. She turned to her communications officer. And send a message to the Eternal Dominion. Tell their commander that humans invented total warfare. We perfected it over 10,000 years of killing each other, and now we're going to teach him what that means. The message, translated through the Concordat's own systems, reached Zha'thik in his command throne. Around him, the bridge crew struggled to manage a battle they no longer understood. Ships were dying. Entire squadrons were being torn apart by weapons that shouldn't work, tactics that made no sense. The humans were pursuing them, actively chasing down vessels with superior speed and maneuverability, using nothing but thrust and ballistic trajectories. They were using their own ships as shields, accepting damage to cover other vessels. They were coordinating across their entire force, with a speed and precision that suggested either an impossible communication system or training so thorough it didn't require communication. "Commander," Velcor said quietly, "we need to retreat." Retreat? The word felt like poison. The Xa'thari do not retreat from primitives with chemical rockets. "Then the Xa'thari are fools," the voice came from Commander Zha'thik's own second, a veteran who had fought in 30 campaigns. "I have been monitoring their communications, Commander. They're not panicking. They're not confused. They are hunting us with the efficiency of apex predators, and they're treating this like a training exercise." As if to punctuate the statement, a human destroyer, HMS Indomitable, positioned itself directly between a damaged Xa'thari battlecruiser and the rest of the alien fleet. Missiles erupted from its broadside, not at the battlecruiser but at the vessels trying to support it, forcing them to evade or take fire. The destroyer was hopelessly outmatched, already taking plasma fire that carved glowing trenches through its armor. But it held position, and while it held, 3 other human ships closed with the battlecruiser, their railguns hammering at its shields until they collapsed, then methodically disabling engines, weapons, sensors. The battlecruiser tried to maneuver, failed, and went dark. The destroyer exploded 17 seconds later, shields finally failing, hull breached in a dozen places, but by then, the battlecruiser was already being boarded by human marines using chemical thrust insertion craft. Boarded. They were boarding enemy vessels in the middle of a fleet engagement. Zha'thik watched it happen and felt something crystallize in his neural complex. A realization that should have come much earlier. These weren't primitives making lucky shots. These were warriors from a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history in constant warfare. They had practiced killing each other with rocks and spears, with swords and bullets, with aircraft and tanks and nuclear weapons. They had written volumes on tactics and strategy. They had entire academic institutions dedicated to the study of warfare. And they had done it all without gravitic technology, without plasma weapons, without any of the tools the Concordat considered standard. They had become masters of warfare with nothing but chemistry, physics, and the desperate ingenuity of survivors on a world that had tried to kill them since their species crawled out of the oceans. "Withdrawal," he said quietly. "Full retreat. Signal all ships, scatter pattern Theta. We regroup at rally point 7s. It was the smart move. It was also too late. The human fleet had divided its forces during the engagement. Zha'thik realized this only when new contacts appeared on his sensors, having used the gas giant's gravitational well to slingshot themselves into intercept positions. More of those primitive carriers, already launching fighters. More missile boats, their magazines somehow still full despite the sustained bombardment. How many weapons had they built? The answer, as Zha'thik would later learn, was simple: more than enough. Humanity didn't manufacture weapons with gravitic fabricators or matter compilers. They still used factories, physical buildings with assembly lines and workers. It was inefficient, outdated, and it meant they could produce ammunition in quantities that boggled the Concordat mind. A Xa'thari ship carried maybe 100 gravitic warheads, each one sophisticated, each one expensive. A human destroyer carried 3,000 missiles and could manufacture more in its onboard magazines. A human fighter carried ammunition for its guns that would last maybe 90 seconds of sustained fire, but there were 1,000 fighters, and they could rearm and relaunch in minutes. "Commander, they're jamming our communications. Impossible. Our quantum encrypted channels can't be." "They're not breaking the encryption, Commander. They're flooding every frequency with white noise. Raw electromagnetic radiation. It's crude, but it's working." Of course it was. Humanity had been conducting electronic warfare since before they left their planet. They understood the electromagnetic spectrum in ways species who'd leapfrogged to quantum communication did not. The Eternal Dominion lurched as something massive struck its aft shield. Alarms wailed in frequencies that hurt Zha'thik's auditory organs. Report. Multiple impacts. Shields at 40% and failing. Commander, we've been targeted by at least 20 human vessels. They're concentrating fire on us specifically. They'd identified the flagship. Of course they had. Human military doctrine probably had entire sections on targeting enemy command and control. Zha'thik made a decision that would haunt him. Abandon ship. All hands to escape pods. Scatter pattern. Go silent and drift. Maybe they'll focus on the ship still fighting. He hated himself for the order even as he gave it. But survival overrode pride. The crew of the Eternal Dominion evacuated with admirable speed, a species bred for efficiency. Within minutes, hundreds of escape pods were jetting away from the dying flagship, using cold gas thrusters that would hopefully hide them from human sensors. On Guardian 3, Admiral Chen watched the flagship disgorge its crew and made another calculation that would define the engagement. All ships, do not fire on escape pods. Mark them for recovery, but let them go. We're not here to commit massacre. Her tactical officer looked uncertain. Ma'am, standard doctrine would be to eliminate all enemy combatants. Standard doctrine doesn't account for psychological warfare, Lieutenant. Every survivor is a witness. Every Xa'thari who lives through this will tell others what happened here. Fear is a weapon, and we're going to use it. She turned back to the tactical display, where the Xa'thari fleet was now in full disarray. Some ships were still fighting, their plasma cannons taking a toll on human vessels. Others were trying to jump to FTL, but human jamming was disrupting their calculations. Still others had gone dark, trying to hide. Status on our forces? Heavy losses, ma'am. We've lost 47 ships confirmed, another 30 damaged beyond combat effectiveness. Casualties estimated at 12,000 across the fleet, but ma'am, we're winning. Chen nodded slowly. 12,000 dead, 12,000 humans who had known what they were facing and fought anyway. The price of defending your home was never cheap. All ships, weapons free. Finish this. The human fleet moved in for the kill with the same methodical precision they'd shown from the start. Damaged Xa'thari ships were targeted first, disabled rather than destroyed when possible. Ships that tried to run were chased down and bracketed by missile fire until they surrendered or died. Ships that fought to the last were obliged. In 43 minutes of sustained combat, the Xa'thari lost 170 ships. Another 97 were captured, disabled, or surrendered. Only 33 escaped to hyperspace, scattering across a dozen different vectors. The Battle of Terra, as human historians would call it, was over. Zha'thik's escape pod drifted in the void for 3 hours before a human recovery ship found it. He expected execution, torture, perhaps experimentation. What he got was a cramped but functional cell on a human prison station, medical care for his injuries, and eventually an interview. The human who came to see him wore a simple uniform with rank insignia Zha'thik now recognized, 3 stars, a high-ranking officer. The human was older, its skin weathered in ways Xa'thari hides never showed, bearing scars that spoke of a lifetime in uniform. Commander Zha'thik, the human said, speaking through a translation device that was, Zha'thik noted with bitter irony, better than the Concordat's version. I'm Lieutenant General Marcus Webb, United Earth Defense Force. I have some questions. I will not betray my people, Zha'thik said, drawing on reserves of pride he didn't quite feel anymore. I'm not asking you to. Webb sat down across from him, moving with the careful economy of someone fighting heavy gravity every day of their life. I want to know why you attacked. What made the Xa'thari think this was a good idea? Zha'thik's mandibles clicked with something that might have been laughter. You know why. Your species rejected the Concordat. We could not allow that precedent. So you came to teach us a lesson. We came to incorporate you, yes, to bring you the benefits of Concordat technology and civilization. He paused. We believed you to be primitives. We believed our technological superiority would make victory inevitable. And now? Now. Zha'thik considered the question, considered the burning wreckage of his fleet still cooling in Earth's orbital space, considered the thousands of his people dead or captured because he had assumed chemical rockets couldn't kill. Now I believe, he said slowly, that humanity is the most terrifying military force I have ever encountered. Not because of your technology, because of your philosophy. Webb leaned forward slightly. Explain. You don't fight to win territory or resources. You fight to survive. Every engagement is total. Every weapon is acceptable. Every tactic is permissible. You don't have rules of war beyond the treatment of prisoners. You don't have restricted weapon classes. You don't fight with elegant detachment. Zha'thik's sensory appendages spread in a gesture of helpless confusion. You fight like the universe is trying to kill you, because it did for millions of years. Your planet is a death world, yes, but that's not what makes you terrifying. What makes you terrifying is that you won. You conquered your death world, and then you turned those survival skills into weapons. Webb nodded slowly. The word you're looking for is adaptation. It's what we do best. The universe threw gravity at us, we invented rockets. It threw distance at us, we invented endurance. It threw bigger predators at us, we invented tools. When we ran out of external threats, we became threats to each other, and we got very, very good at it. Why? Zha'thik asked. Why maintain such brutal military capability when you could have focused on technology, on advancement? Because hoping for peace while preparing for war is smart. Hoping for peace while being unprepared is suicide. Webb stood. The Concordat made an assumption based on incomplete data. You saw our technology and judged our capability. You didn't see our history. You didn't see 10,000 years of humans fighting humans. You didn't see the lessons we learned in blood. He moved to the door, then paused. I'll tell you something, Commander. We didn't want this fight. We would have preferred peace. But you came to our home. You threatened our families. You thought we'd surrender because we used chemical rockets and metal ships. Webb's expression was harder than hull armor. What you didn't understand is that those chemical rockets and metal ships are operated by apes who learn to kill before they learn to talk. And we've been practicing ever since. The door closed, leaving Zha'thik alone with his thoughts. 3 weeks later, a Concordat diplomatic vessel arrived at the edge of Earth's system, broadcasting peaceful intentions and requesting an audience with human leadership. They were granted permission to approach, escorted by a full squadron of human destroyers whose weapons never quite stopped tracking the diplomatic ship. The negotiations that followed would reshape galactic politics. The Xa'thari withdrew their claim on human space. The Concordat formally recognized Earth as a sovereign power. More importantly, they recognized humanity as a military power that would not be easily conquered. Word spread through the Concordat faster than light travel. The species that used chemical weapons and kinetic projectiles had destroyed a Xa'thari fleet. The primitives from the death world had won. Some species saw opportunity. If the humans could fight the Xa'thari to a standstill, perhaps they could be persuaded to assist others who chafed under Concordat rule. Diplomatic overtures began arriving at Earth, tentative at first, then with increasing frequency. Other species saw a threat. If humanity could defeat the Xa'thari, what else could they do? Better to establish relations now, while humans still remembered that not every alien species had tried to conquer them. And some species simply learned a lesson that Zha'thik had learned too late. Never underestimate an enemy based on their technology alone. Humanity had proven that sophistication was no match for determination, that elegance was no defense against brutality, and that the most primitive weapon wielded by a survivor was deadlier than any civilized tool wielded by a conqueror. On Guardian 3, Admiral Chen stood at the observation window, looking out at the orbital space that had been a battlefield. Recovery teams were still pulling debris and bodies from the void, a process that would take months. The cost had been high, the price inhuman. Lives weighed on her, but they had won. Earth remained free. Ma'am, her tactical officer approached. We're receiving a transmission from the construction yards on Luna. They're asking when you want to review the next-generation defense plans." Chen smiled thinly. "Tell them I'll review them tomorrow. And tell them to keep the railguns. They work just fine." "Yes, ma'am." Alone again, Chen watched a recovery ship gently retrieve an escape pod marked with Xa'thari insignia. Inside would be another alien who had learned the hard way that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't any particular technology. It was the simple, brutal fact that humans refused to die quietly. Across the galaxy, in command centers and strategic planning rooms, military theorists began updating their assessments of human capability. The entry for Earth, previously marked as primitive kinetic age civilization, received extensive revisions. One line stood out in every report, written in a dozen different languages by species who had received the news with reactions ranging from horror to respect. Humanity does not fight with superior technology. They fight with superior determination. Engagement not recommended. Friendship strongly suggested, far from Earth, in the depths of space where the scattered Xa'thari survivors had regrouped. Commander Zha'thik addressed his remaining officers. His once proud fleet was gone. His career was ended. But he still had a duty to his species. "Tell the Council," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-learned wisdom, "that humanity must never be underestimated again. Tell them that their kinetic weapons and chemical rockets are not primitive. They are proven. Tell them that we attacked, a death world species, and learned why they survived when more advanced civilizations would have perished." He paused, mandibles spreading in an expression that might have been resignation or respect. "Tell them that we met the humans in battle, and the humans taught us that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who learned to fight just to survive another day." The message would reach the Concordat Council. It would be filed, studied, and eventually accepted as truth. The age of casually dismissing humanity was over. And on Earth, humanity did what it had always done, it continued. Building, learning, preparing. Because somewhere in the galaxy, there might be another species that needed to learn the same lesson. Another fleet that would come to Earth thinking chemical rockets and metal ships made for easy prey. And humanity would be ready. They always were, because that's what survivors do.